Well, on Saturday, when I saw this sign at a No Kings protest, I really wished David Potoff could see that. David Potoff was the smartest person I have ever known about economic policy, and he did not like Donald Trump. Donald Trump was right about that. Smart people don't like him. When I was the chief of staff of the Senate Finance Committee, I had the honor of hiring David Potoff as the committee's chief economist. He was also our only economist. I told him I couldn't pay him what he was worth in the Senate staff salary structure, but I could give him the fanciest title I could think of for that job. David was born a year before Bernie Sanders in the same Brooklyn neighborhood and earned his PhD in economics at MIT. The chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, and I both loved David Potoff as a friend and as a teacher. There was just nothing better than having our very own economist at our side all the time, ready to make us sound smarter. And David was everything that Donald Trump hates. David Potoff was a dedicated public servant in every sense who never tried to get rich and tried to make his country and his community a better place every day of his life. And on October 8th of last year, David emailed me saying, on October 18th, No King's Day, I will be protesting in a march in Lexington, Massachusetts. I was told that we could not march on the green, even though that is where the revolution started, getting rid of one king, and I thought it would be symbolic to protest there to keep another king out. And so I was intending to get arrested on the green. Turns out a permit has been granted, so we can go on the green. However, if there are masked ICE agents at the protest, I may still get arrested. I told my 85-year-old dear friend to make sure he had a lawyer's phone number in his pocket. And a month later, I got an email from David reporting, so never did get arrested at No King's Day in Lexington for two reasons. One, no ICE agents, and two, I never made it because as I was walking from parking lot to Lexington Green, I again became lightheaded and fell to the ground. Quickly recovered, but I am having a cardiac catheterization on Monday. I am constantly out of breath, etc. Have trouble walking more than 200 yards. But still, he was going to go to the No Kings protest. And 2 weeks later, I got a call from David's devoted daughter, Jill, the mother of his two grandchildren, Liam and Brooke, telling me that David was gone. And on Saturday, I felt David's presence again in every white-haired protester who left their homes to rise up against Donald Trump. I thought of everything these crusaders have lived through. They were born into World War II, and they became a part of the first successful mass protest against an American war, the Vietnam War. It took years, but their protest succeeded in ending that war years earlier than it would have ended. They saved lives with that protest. Many of them had already risked their lives in the 1960s in southern states, protesting and trying to help black people register to vote. They thought they had finished protesting war after Vietnam. It was hard to believe that mistakes like that could ever be made again, but in the 21st century, they came out again to protest the forever wars started by Republican President George W. Bush in Iraq and Afghanistan. And when each era of protest was over for them, they had a right to think that they had attended their last protest. They had a right to think that America was going in the right direction. They had a right to think that their only obligation now was to vote. They earned that. But then came Donald Trump. And on Saturday, Americans of all ages, from children to people in their 90s, came out to protest something America has never protested before. They were protesting a person. That had never happened before. Plenty of Vietnam War protesters hated Richard Nixon, but they were not actually protesting Richard Nixon. They were protesting his war. If Richard Nixon had ended the Vietnam War, the protests would have stopped. But the No Kings protest is a protest against Donald Trump. The No Kings protest movement started before Donald Trump started his war in Iran. And on Saturday, Donald Trump's war in Iran was only part of what people were protesting. If Donald Trump had ended his war in Iran the week before, all of the same people still would have turned out for the No Kings protest. They were protesting Donald Trump himself, the first person in American history to earn a nationwide protest against him. And that protest actually became worldwide on Saturday. And once again, Donald Trump, as an object of protest himself, set a record for the biggest mass protest in American history. If you're 25 years old and healthy and you couldn't get to a No Kings protest on Saturday because you were working or because you didn't know where the closest one was, David Potoff would say, that's okay, but just make sure you vote in November. That was one of the points of the No Kings protests, to make sure people vote in November. But if you're 25 years old or 35 years old and you could have gone and thought about it, but then got attached to something on your screen and just couldn't pull yourself away and didn't go, the next time that happens, please think about David Potoff and how much he would love to be able to be there. Think about 85-year-old David Potoff being willing to get arrested if that's what it came to. Think about all the people David Potoff's age and older who were there on Saturday, people in their 80s and 90s who had to be there. That's what they felt. They felt they had to be there. For them, it feels like they don't have a choice. It feels like a duty, their duty as citizens of the United States of America. And remember that when an 85-year-old goes to a protest, they are not protesting for themselves. They are protesting for the people much younger than they are and the future that those younger people can have. And remember how long those 85-year-old protesters have been protesting for you and your future, and maybe find a way to say thank you sometime. When I saw that sign on Saturday of Donald Trump saying, "Smart people don't like me," I immediately texted our producers right there from the scene to fact check that quote. And they immediately came up with this.
Smart people don't like me.
When he's right, he's right. But now there are Trump voters who don't like him. In fact, according to the polls, there are now millions of Trump voters who have turned against Donald Trump and Donald Trump's war. Staten Island is one of the 5 boroughs of New York City, but it is a world away from the rest of New York City across New York Harbor. It is the only Republican section of New York City, the only Republican borough. Staten Island always votes Republican as reliably as Alabama. And on Saturday, Giuseppe Palazzolo took the Staten Island ferry over to Manhattan to march against the person who he says he voted for President of the United States.
Giuseppe Palazzolo.
Okay.
Here's my card.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. So, how old are you and where are you from?
I'm from Staten Island, and I've been a MAGA supporter from the very beginning. I believed in him. I thought that he would end wars, like he said in his campaign. He said he wouldn't start wars. He said he'd bring peace to the Middle East. Now look at us. We're knee-deep in this illegal war. He hasn't found the congressional approval. Now we're further from peace and closer to catastrophe than ever before. I feel so betrayed. He went against his campaign promises in a very blatant way.
The day after the No Kings protest, the first American Pope delivered a sermon in Italian about the King of Peace. And in that sermon, the Pope very clearly rebuked Donald Trump for starting his war in Iran. And the Pope rebuked the performance art religiosity of Donald Trump's Secretary of Defense, who last week publicly prayed to his definition of God to help him kill people.
Let every round find its mark against the enemies of righteousness and our great nation.
And yesterday, the Pope said, "This, our God, Jesus Christ, King of Peace, who rejects war, whom no one can use to justify war. He does not listen to the prayers of those who wage war, but rejects them, saying, 'Even though you make many prayers, I will not listen. Your hands are full of blood.'" At St. Brendan's Elementary School in Boston, the nuns taught us that when we get sent off to war, as they were sure we would at some point, we could pray for our own safety, or we could pray for the safe return from war of someone we loved, but we could not. We could not ask the King of Peace for his help in killing people, even in war. Pete Hegseth is a member of a new religion that did not exist when I was in elementary school. It was invented in America during Pete Hegseth's lifetime. The founder of Pete Hegseth's religion identifies himself as a Christian nationalist. And so Pete Hegseth, like many before him, has found a religion of convenience, a religion that conveniently allows him to do whatever he wants to do as he moves through his 3 marriages and turns extramarital affairs into the next marriage, all while proclaiming his religious piety. And now the first defense secretary in history who believes that his job is to publicly pray for success in killing people offers those prayers that the Pope says will be ignored because he offers those prayers with hands full of blood.
This is no longer a routine speech. It reads like a sharp political indictment, exposing how power has been dangerously personalized. When a movement like No Kings shifts from opposing policies to directly targeting an individual, it signals a deep fracture of public trust. Those who once believed and supported are now turning away, not over ideological differences, but because of a profound sense of betrayal. Even more troubling is the fusion of war, morality, and religion into tools that justify power. When prayers are invoked to legitimize violence, politics ceases to be about governance and becomes a stage where personal ambition is masked as righteousness. In that context, silence or evasion is no longer neutral. It is complicity. And when the young remain disengaged, while the elderly still take to the streets for a future they may never see, the gap between civic responsibility and apathy becomes stark, undeniable, and impossible to excuse.